David, can you give us an overview?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, committee. Senate Bill 505 would increase the CAPERS retirement benefit multiplier for security officers in the CAPERS correctional subgroup. The increase would be to 2%. Currently, it's either a 1.75 for those CAPERS 1 service prior to January 1 of 2024 or 1.85 for service after that date, and all CAPERS 2 Tier 2 service. So those multipliers would just be 2% for these officers for all years of participating service. And I can stand for any questions.
David, thank you very much. Committee, are there questions? I see none. Committee, we will now hear information on this bill from Alan Conroy, the Executive Director of CAPERS. Alan, welcome.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Certainly pleased to be here and try to give you a little background information on Senate Bill 505. And as David has explained, this would increase the multiplier for the CAPERS correctional group from current 1.85 to 2%. Just as kind of a reminder, the CAPERS correctional group is a subgroup of state employees that includes correctional officers, and so they're in a group called C55. And then there's other staff then, which are in a group called C60, which have sort of daily and continuous inmate contact. Might be power plant operators, food service, correctional industries, and so forth. Both these subgroups have the same benefit formula as CAPERS members, but their difference is currently that they have a normal, younger or earlier normal retirement age than CAPERS members in CAPERS 1 or 2. Because of some changes right now, if the member in Group A, so that'd be the correctional officers, the largest group, if they joined the system before July 1st, 2009, they have a normal retirement age at age 55 with 3 years of service. Group B's at age 60 with 3 years of service. And then after July 1st, 2009, for those same groups, it was changed from age 55 to 10 years, then to age 60 with 10 years. There's about 1,800 members within the CAPERS state school group out of 107,000, so it's about 1.7% of that larger group that includes state school employees and so forth. The CAPERS correctional group is the only group of CAPERS members who are still enrolled in the CAPERS 2 plan design. So if a correctional officer is hired today, they would go into the CAPERS 2 correctional group, while all other state school people would go into CAPERS 3. Let's see, so the decision was made at the time. I think the discussion was whether or not to include this group in the CAPERS 3. The decision was made in terms of the type of challenging work these individuals do and recruitment and retention issues even back then, that they would leave them in the CAPERS. The decision was made to leave them in the CAPERS 2 group. So they're in CAPERS 2, so it's the traditional defined benefit program, so final average salary times years of service times the multiplier. And again, generally right now it's 1.85, and this bill would change that multiplier from the 1.85 to 2% starting July 1st of this year. Over the past 5 years, just to kind of give you an example of how the change would impact potential retirement benefits, when a CAPERS correctional member retires, they have an average years of service of 23 and a final average salary of around $53,000. So you use that final average salary multiplier years of service, and you can see in the middle of page 2 on my testimony, the monthly benefit currently, based on those assumptions, would be about a little under $1,900 a month. This would, $1,879 would get it to a little over $2,000. So it would increase the monthly benefit for these individuals in this example by about $153 a month, or about $1,800 a year. So adding the change then does increase the unfunded actuarial liability. And of course, that is for then service that you're granting here at this higher rate, this 2% multiplier before the change in this bill. And so that one-time cost would be about $22 million because of the higher multiplier. And of course, I guess this is kind of one of the interesting parts of the mechanics, I guess. Since they're part of the state school group, that $22 million unfunded liability goes into the big state school group. And so that's shared by the state, all the state for all the agencies, state agencies and school districts, since the state pays all that. And then there's the normal cost, so that's the new cost for current and going forward for people now that would be entitled to this higher multiplier. And you can see on page 3, just the example there, it's about 0.6% increase in the employer contribution for each of the subgroups, and you can see how it would impact the employer contribution that the Department of Corrections pays. Like for C55 group, those correctional officers, it's currently in 25, it'd be 12.34%. This would get it up to 12.9%. And again, because of the state school group is so large, this $22 million unfunded actuarial liability, it's just a 0.2% increase in that 0.05, and so it would require the state to pay that. So overall, it's about an additional, going forward, increased contributions of about $2.77 million in 2025 and $2.8 million in 2026. And there's just some language there. We just suggest if the bill is going to be moved forward, there may be some additional clarifying language, particularly if the individual had some regular capers, moves into correctional, the correctional group, where does that 2%, does it apply to all service or just the service under capers correctional? And we just note, as you'd see in the fiscal note, that we could administer the change without any additional resources.
It appears to be silent on whether it should be funded through SGF or the increasingly actual liability. 22.3 million is the estimated increase in the UAL. Is that the same amount if we paid for it out of SGF?
Yes, and generally most of the positions in the Department of Corrections could probably provide additional information, but most of it's out of the general fund for their staffing. So yes, so if you did it all on one paid, you could just pay it one lump sum out of the general fund, I guess, to answer your question.
Thank you. Committee, are there questions for Alan? Senator Pittman.
Thank you, Alan. Historically, you'll see inside of the COAS testimony, historically, there's been a lot of bills that have been introduced to shift correction officers into KP&F for the police and firefighters, for these security officers and their staff. What is the multiplier for KP&F?
2.5%.
So at 1.85, going up to 2% is a far cry away from the KP&F rate that other police officers and officers in the firefighting force have, right?
That's correct.
Right. And their average salaries tend to be a lot higher too, is that not correct, when they retire?
I guess it would depend on the employer. Probably, I guess in some entities that'd be correct, it'd be higher than what the correctional officer pay scale, yes.
And I believe every time we tried to go into KP&F, the unfunded liability was actually a lot higher each time, wasn't it?
Yes, it would. It'd be considerably higher, both on the unfunded liability and the additional costs going forward, yes.
And also, just to be absolutely clear, this is just for new officers that are not new officers, not current retirees, even though I would support that, but in this current proposition. It's just for moving forward, retiring now and into the future.
That's right, current employees, and then, of course, any employees hired in the future.
Thanks.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the testimony. I see that one question I had has been answered in your document about the unfunded actuarial liability. What's the current UAL for this group in Capers?
Well, it's in the state school group. I'm not sure if Jared can dig out for correctional. For state school, it's over $6 billion. So 22 million, and that's why it kind of gets out to that second decimal point, but I don't know if Jared has it handy, or we can provide it to you.
So over $6 billion currently?
Yes.
Okay. And is this might be a question for the reviser. We kind of looked at something like this last year, I think, about putting firefighters and police officers, changing the capers, or am I thinking of some, into correctional officers into the firefighters, and okay, and that didn't advance. So, but this is something a little bit different. Thank you.
Additional questions for Alan? Senator Pittman?
I just want to clarify, we did have that as an offer. In 2018, though, there was a bill in the House, you might remember, Senator Warren, where correction officers were going to move into KPNF, and it passed the House on a vote of 113-9.
Mr. Chair, thank you. I wasn't in the House in 2018, but 2019. Thank you.
Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Alan, thank you for your testimony. So the $6 billion, we're actually $9.6 billion still, aren't we, on the whole program?
On the entire Capers unfunded life, it's over $9 billion, and that'd be for local as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
And just to make sure I understand, the teacher's number right now, is it 1.85?
Yes, all regular Capers would be at that 1.85.
Okay, thank you.
Senator Dietrich?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here. So I just wanted to clarify, under your clarifying amendments, you suggest that we have language that separates out this increase if it goes forward versus what their current level is, or
Yes,
whatever
so
Capers.
if they, let's say they were a regular Capers member outside the Department of Corrections, so maybe they worked for a city for 5 years and then joined the Department of Corrections, we'd just like some clarifying language to make sure if the intent, whatever the intent is, but if it only applies to the higher multiplier would only apply to the Capers Correctional Service, or would it also apply if they had some prior regular Capers service?
May I just ask a follow-up? That's been our standard practice, hasn't it? When we change a multiplier, it doesn't apply to both positions that they might have had.
I think that'd probably be the traditional way to do it, yes.
Thank you.
Okay. Senator?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. As you know, this Capers is not in my wheelhouse of what I deal with every day, and so I always have questions that may seem quite ignorant. So thank you for your patience with me. On the multiplier that we talked about, the 1.85%, it's for the new people that have not retired just yet. And whenever we say the employer will pay, who's the employer?
In this case, it'd be the state of Kansas as the employer for the Department of Corrections.
So then the chair's question about if this were to come out of state general funds, where else could it have come out if the state is the employer?
I mean, they do have some other funds for their employees, probably Correctional Industries might be an example, which is a fee-funded program, you know, where they sell goods to state and local agencies. And so there might be some fee funds there. But the vast majority, I believe, of their budget for personnel costs are financed from the state general fund.
And if I remember correctly, I think it was last year's bill on the firefighters, they funded that themselves. Is that right? This was not something that came out of state general funds.
Well, I guess one of the recent enhancements in terms of the amount of capped benefits that they can still earn, there was an adjustment upward at that point in the employee contribution to help fund that benefit increase under KPNF. That's right.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Gossage, just for further clarification, I think what you may be referring to is the addition of wildlife and parks officers into KPNF last year, and the department paid for that up front out of fee funds. Senator Fagg, did you have an additional question?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, when I sit here and look at this, when you look at capers and you look at your example of what they currently have, and you add Social Security to that, when a person retires, what's the after effect? Because I know there's part of that you don't pay taxes on, and, you know, they're not going to have a drop in pay when they retire, are they? When you look at the total package?
Well, I mean, I guess the goal is between capers and Social Security, you know, that retirement replacement ratio, we're hoping to get them between 70 and 80%, and then personal savings beyond that to maintain their lifestyle after retirement compared to when they're working. But usually, of course, taxes, there's a reduction in taxes once a person retires, and so that helps in terms of monthly pay or monthly income.
Thank you.
Okay. Alan, thank you very much. He'll be around for additional questions with Alan, if that's okay. If we have time after the proponents, then we can circle back if we need to. We will now turn our attention to the proponents. First up is Senator Jeff Pittman.
Mr. Chairman Longbine, my colleagues, look, I know that this committee has not been favorable to cost of living allowances and increasing the liability. I am been here for a long time. I understand that. However, I'm presenting this out as another option. The correction officers perform such a vital role. You'll see on there, the average salary of retirement was about $53,000. I'm on the Ways and Means Committee. They presented out why we need to increase the starting salaries of our Kansas Highway Patrol and our KBI officers by 10%. And they gave starting salaries of different districts, and they started around $50,000 to $55,000. Starting salaries. These are retiring officers in our correctional facility, and they face dangers just like our first responders. You could call these our last responders in the chain. I don't know if that's really a term or not, but they are responders, and they're a critical part of that security and the whole justice system. I don't know if you know this, they don't walk into those facilities with weapons. Perhaps they have mace, but when they're typical officers walking around inside of there, they're unarmed, they're working with medium and high security inmates, often dangerous criminals that are put in there, often related to gangs, and those forces inside often affect the folks outside. They have connections outside. And the correction officers in my community are very aware of the impact that this can have on their lives and their families' lives when they're interacting with this population. They are effectively police officers, yet we don't treat them the same. And we've increased their salary. You'll see from Secretary Zamuda, he's in support of this. He's thankful for the salary increases we've given to our officers who've been typically neglected. But we've asked them to often work 80-hour weeks through the pandemic. And this is just another tool in our tool shed to keep the workforce in our correction facilities operating. They look at this. They see their retirement benefits. There's a reason why they stay in this very, very difficult job. And often it's because they want to stay in the community. They appreciate the retirement benefits. And they want to stay, and we want them to stay. The longer they stay in service with us, the more safe it becomes inside those facilities for all involved. And so one of the ways we can do that is incentivize that longevity with a good retirement system. We've tried over and over again. You'll see in the Coast testimony, like I said, we've tried to get them into the KPNF where they really belong. The cost was high. We didn't want to bring everybody into that. Totally understand. So why not take the unique position of the Corrections 2.0 system that we have and tweak it just a little bit? Tweak it just a little bit, increase it. We're talking about a benefit of $1,800 per year. That might not sound like a lot, but over 10 years, that's $18,000, and 20 years, you can do the math. It means a lot. It means a lot to these officers. They do a human's job on our behalf, a job that I don't think any of us would probably take right now in our lives. I'd like you to go in there and try their jobs for a couple days, and maybe you'd understand the difficulties at it. You might already understand that, but I'd ask for your support, and I hope that we do work this bill, Mr. Chair. Appreciate the opportunity to speak.
Thank you, Senator. Are there questions for the senator? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Senator, for your presentation. The question I have for you, because I've been there and I understand exactly what you're talking about, and we appreciate what they do. My thought was that the 22 million, maybe we need to put more into salary, and that helps them in their formula as it goes along, and it helps them today. That's my opinion on this. This unfunded liability, I'm not going to get into that, but until I see that turning, I don't think we add to that. But I do think that you can help them currently with salary, and that's where it should be helped if it needs to be helped.
Additional questions for the senator? I see none. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I might respond to that?
Might. Yeah.
I appreciate the offer for increased salary, and I'll hold you to it. I hope we're planning on having a 24/7, making the increases we put in place over the last 2 years. We'll have that in the budget, and we're hoping to make that permanent this year. I think it's in the governor's budget. I think we've got it today in Ways and Means, so appreciate that. I don't think 22 million goes as far as the upfront 22 million that this CAPERS retirement benefit would go, though. I think this is a leveraged piece of 22 million that I'd have to look at all the numbers, but I think this goes further for retention than that salary increase for 22 million would go.
Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Senator. You said you do have to go look at the numbers, and the question I had was, how much does it cost SGF each year were this to be implemented to fund it from the employer side?
I think, Mr. Chair, Senator Warren, I think Mr. Conroy had said something in the range of 2.5 million or so.
2.5 million a year.
I think that was in his testimony, though.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Warren, I can direct you to the fiscal note that was prepared that's with the bill. I think it's a range from 2.96 up to 3.58, depending on which group you're looking at.
Maybe I lowballed it.
Close.
Okay. Is
Okay.
that it?
Thank you, Senator. We will now turn our attention to David Georges, who's a correctional counselor with Hutchinson Correctional Facility. David, welcome. If you could keep your testimony to about 5 minutes or less, that'd be helpful.
Chairman Longbine and members of the committee, thank you for allowing me to speak here today. And Representative Pittman, thank you for introducing the bill. In support of the bill 505, I am Dave Georges. I work as a corrections counselor for the Hutchinson Correctional Facility. I have been in that position for over 13 years. 4 years prior to that, I was a corrections officer. Prior to coming to the Kansas Department of Corrections, I was a police officer on the streets for 18 years. So essentially, I'm working on my second retirement. The proposal in front of you helps with our chronic understaffing that we have at the facilities. As you all are very aware, these facilities are struggling to get people to come in the door, and the stagnant wages have failed to keep pace with the outside companies that will hire them immediately. Because your corrections officers, you're training, you were spending roughly, when I started, $23,000 to train them and another $2,500 to uniform them. But if they don't stick around, you've thrown that money away. The Kansas Police and Fire retirement system that we were trying to get into was something that officers look forward to. And among the legislators, we've heard that you're worried about the unfunded liabilities, and we understand that. Senate Bill 505 is a good approach, adding that 2%. The officers get that opportunity to look at a retirement that is better than what they have right now. We have officers that are leaving after 8 years because they can go to Lowe's and get a better retirement. That's just not right. We need to work on a better system. Simply adjusting the multiplier gives that opportunity and redirects that retirement that they're looking forward to. Working of our corrections officers is very hard. You talk about corrections officers as police officers. Not only are we trained, you train us as police officers, you train us as paramedics, you train us as firemen. These employees are very sought after because we are a city within a city. We are the first responders to every gang violent incident that you hear in the news, every riot. We are there first. Law enforcement on the outside, response time is 30 minutes at best to get them into a facility because we are a secured facility. We don't carry firearms. So they're not allowed in. We have to deal with the issue ourselves. Every day, we work to make sure our communities are safer. And with conversations with my colleagues who are sitting here in this room today, listening to this testimony, this is something that they talk about repeatedly. What is our retirement going to look like? And I started on Tier 1 before 2009. My retirement could be better, yes. That's what we're looking forward to in here with this proposal. And with this, we hope that you see how important it is to us, and we hope that you take advantage of this new approach. Thank you.
David, thank you for your testimony. Thank you for your service. Committee, other questions? Senator Fagg?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. David, thank you for your presentation. You mentioned you was on your double. Will you get 2 capers checks? Explain that to me.
No, sir. I was a police officer for the Wichita Police Department.
Okay, they
So
got their own program.
They have their own retirement system.
Yeah, okay. Next question I would ask you is how do we answer when the teachers show up and say, you know, we really need ours too? Where do we stop this process?
Well, my first response was, how many teachers were stabbed this year from their,
A few of them around the country.
yes, around the country, but I'm in Kansas.
How many has been stabbed on the correction area?
Just last week.
How
At
many for
Lansing.
last year?
In the last year, I couldn't give you a number. I know the incident last week at Lansing where an officer was stabbed.
Okay.
So, and we thank you for allowing us to have stab-resistant and bullet-resistant vests, but now the population has figured out to go around the vest.
Go around the bend. Okay, thank you.
Additional questions, committee? See none. Thank you very much for your testimony. Committee, let me draw your attention to proponent written-only testimony from Secretary Zamuda, Sarah LaFrenz with COAS, and Wyatt Smith, who is a correction officer at Larned. I have no other proponent, opponent, or neutral testimony submitted at this time. So we will close the hearing on Senate Bill 505, and we will now turn our attention to open the hearing on House Bill 2560. David, can you give us an overview?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. House Bill 2560 amends provisions of the State Banking Code concerning applications when those would be considered abandoned or expired, and also allows an originating trustee to have a principal place of business outside of Kansas. So Section 1 removes from statute the requirement that the commissioner has to deny an application that is incomplete. And Section 2 provides that if an applicant fails to complete an application under the State Banking Code within 60 days after notification that such application is incomplete, it would be considered abandoned and the application fee would not be refunded. An applicant whose application is abandoned may reapply at any time. Section 2 also adds language to acquire a bank or trust company to engage in the approved activity within 18 months from the date of approval of the application. Failure to comply with this deadline would have the application be deemed expired and then require a new application fee and approval. There is an exception to this for those applications that conduct trust business laid out in the section. The commissioner may extend the deadline indefinitely if approval from another state or federal regulator is necessary to engage in the activity, or up to 180 days for good cause determined by the commissioner. The State Banking Board may designate the commissioner to determine the completeness of any application requiring banking board approval or deem such applications expired. Section 3 concerns change of control or merger of a bank or trust company. It provides that the commissioner, if the commissioner does not act on a complete application to change, control, or merge a bank or trust company within the 60-day period prior to the proposed change of control or merger, and the applicant has received approval from all applicable federal and state agencies, that application would stand approved. And then finally, Section 4, this concerns trust companies. It removes from the definition of originating trustee that the principal place of business be in the state, and adds language that either the contracting trustee or the originating trustee could have its principal place of business in Kansas. The House made no amendments to Senate Bill 2560. It passed on final action by a vote of 119 to 0. And I can stand for any questions.
David, thank you. Committee, are there questions of David? I see none. Thank you. We will now turn our attention to the proponent testimony. Brock Roller with the Office of the State Banking Commissioners. Welcome back, Brock.
Thank you, Chairman Longbine and members of the committee. You know, it's always fun following a CAPERS bill where we're talking millions and billions in fiscal impact, and we're talking hundreds. But this bill is very important to us. We really appreciate holding a hearing on House Bill 2560. So I'm going to go in order how this bill is drafted, although I will be perfectly honest, I think the second point I make is the more important one that we need to get amended. This bill actually will do two things. As mentioned, it will give us the authority to abandon and declare approved applications stale. And unfortunately, a couple of applications do take a substantial amount of time for our applications and statistics manager Tanner Howard, OSBC leadership, and the State Banking Board to approve and ensure that the bank or trust company has engaged in the activity. So our intent with this bill is just to have a state bank or trust company wait until they are ready to engage in the activity before they submit an application and are ready to go forward with the process. Currently, what we are able to do is we can request a withdrawal, but we cannot demand a bank or trust company to withdraw the application, or we need to threaten to issue an administrative action to deny. Quite frankly, I feel that's unnecessary and creates a black mark on both the bank and trust company. So being able to declare an application abandoned or stale will allow us to move on from the application without having any sort of negative implication on the bank or trust company. Now, our agency, we have two divisions. Under the banking division is what we are requesting this amendment to, but under our consumer mortgage lending division, we've had the ability to abandon applications for quite some time. I believe it's 2014, if I'm not mistaken. And this has proven to be very effective in ensuring that when we receive an application, the company is ready to go forward with the process. In fact, only about 2.5% of applications from corporations need to be abandoned on our consumer mortgage lending division. We're expecting about the same here, which is why we have such ridiculously low fiscal impact of about $500. We're anticipating about one application a year that we need to declare abandoned or stale, where the bank or trust company will then reapply, which will create 2 application fees. There are a couple other changes that we made to reflect our ability to abandon applications. That's in Section 1 and Section 3, I believe. The second point that I mentioned, I feel, is the more important part of this bill, 92107. We are requesting an amendment to this statute that will reduce an unintended bureaucracy. We believe that this statute was created back when trust companies could only operate in one state. That is not the case anymore. It is the exception to the rule to only be in Kansas. And trust companies are operating in multiple states. So our request is to amend the requirement that both the contracting and originating trustee are located in Kansas to make it just be one. What that will allow is a bank or trust company to do a bulk transfer from one trustee to another under Kansas law. Currently, if we have a bank or trust company that wants to do a transfer, it needs to be on an individual basis. That creates a ridiculously cumbersome process. So Our position is this does not create a safety and soundness risk and brings business into Kansas. To me, it's a slam dunk. I think we do need to make this change. So with that, Chairman Longbine, I thank you for allowing me to present my testimony. I'll be more than happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time.
Brock, thank you very much. I think we'll listen to the other proponent, and then we'll ask questions of both of you, if that's okay. Meeting next, we have Will Bergman, who is the in-house counsel with Midwest Trust Company. Welcome, Will.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, thank you so much for this opportunity to provide proponent testimony to House Bill 2560. As you said, I'm Will Bergman. I'm an in-house counsel for a personal trust company that's headquartered in Senator Warren's district. And I know over the last couple of years, you've noticed that you've seen a few more trust bills, right? And I know those aren't always the most exciting in comparison to capers and everything else you're doing, but it is really, really important for a few different reasons. We have a lot of different factors and a confluence of them that are driving us towards the need for both a modernization of the UTC. Thank you so much, all of you, for approving some of those changes the last couple of years. That's really helped us as a Kansas trust company become more competitive regionally and nationally. And so that's been great. So one component of that is the estate tax exemption, right? So in the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act in 2017 or 2018, it raised the cap for the estate tax exemption. It doubled it. At the end of 2025, it's going to shrink it in half. And so because of that, there's a lot of estate planning being undergone for estate tax consequences. So there's a lot more high-income people, wealthier individuals needing to do estate tax planning, and that is utilizing, our goal is to have them utilize Kansas law. And so, and the other component is the baby boomers, right? So we have this most ridiculously large sums of money that are being transferred. And our goal is always to try and be able to be fiduciaries on those accounts here in Kansas. And so those are kind of the background. So over the last couple of years, we've done a lot of the changes from a legal perspective on the estate planning. Now what it is there's a process that was drafted and created here 20, 30 years ago. They put a lot of time and effort into it. But with the way that banking, as Brock said, and trust companies can work in different states, it's not very useful, hasn't been used in decades. So that is where we come to the originating trustee statute. Our goal, so as Brock said, the originating trustee statute is a bulk transfer process. So rather than going one account by one account, which is how most transfers in this fiduciary space occurs, we're trying to do it on a bulk process. And so I've worked underneath statutes in other states, and this incorporation of this change is very important to allow us to move it into Kansas. So if we look at it from a global perspective, what could be some of the problems? What happens if a beneficiary raises their hand and says, I don't want to go to this new trust company, I don't know them, they're new to me? Well, what happens is they can get pulled out, right? So they're protected. And then there's a process in place that's originally drafted. So there's going to the probate court. Or there's also a way in which you can just amend the original contract and pull them out and talk to them. But one of the main reasons why that's important is the original trustee could always resign as well. So there's other mechanisms here in place. So this is very nuanced, very sophisticated processes in place, but this is trying to make it easier on the beneficiary, on the probate court, and on both trust companies to make it a more effective manner of doing it. I'm willing to stand for any questions if anyone may have.
Well, thank you very much. Committee will open it to questions of the proponent, either one of them. So Senator Dietrich.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am missing something, and maybe I'm just not listening clearly enough. Just talk to me a little bit about a bulk transfer.
Okay.
How, in the real world, how does that apply?
So I live in the weeds, so I apologize. So basically, say your family created a trust for you to be. There's a trustee, which could be an individual. It could be a company, right? So we're a company, right? So a company is going to last forever. That's the intent. We have insurance. We're regulated by the bank commissioner staff versus an individual. But in this case, what happens if there's 50 accounts? What happens if there's 50 of you? And they're all managed by a trust department. And say, for example, one of the reasons why we're advocating for this is there's a rural bank in Missouri that that had one person in their trust department, been there for 30 years, was looking to retire, gave them 3 years notice, never found a solution, couldn't hire anyone in rural Missouri to administer these accounts. And so panic started to set in, right? How do we hire in for this? How do we get this to be done? And so rather than resigning on each one and then saying, now it's your turn to try and find a successor trustee. Is it going to be you? Is it going to be a relative? What are the restrictions of the document? What we're trying to do is help people be able to do it without that panic. And so there's a process in place which protects the individual. So all 50 of those accounts from that rural Missouri bank will then be able to go through, get approved, and then be pushed out. And so that's what the bulk transfer process is. It's actually the moving from one trustee to another, right? And again, as a fiduciary, we have the highest obligations under the law, right? We have our trust officers are third social workers, 2/3 attorneys, right? So it's really important that they take great care of each individual. And so for this rural bank, no banker can be a trust officer. No trust officer should be a banker, right? There's a true bifurcation there. And so this process is supposed to protect those individuals. And I think this will help us as we go through with retirements in trust departments and also with the sophistication and the quantity of accounts that are being created. Did that answer your question?
Yes, and thank you so much. I appreciate it. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here this morning, Will. And just to follow up on that, so how does the application tie into the bulk transfer?
So I love being in the weeds. Thank you, guys. This is fun for me. My wife doesn't like talking about this. So there's a contract between the originating trustee and the contracting trustee, right? So the originating trustee is current trustee, and then the contracting trustee is the one who's going to be receiving it. So they enter into a contract which governs how the accounts are going to be moved. Where is it going to be? Who's going to be administrating them? Where is this process? Then once that is accomplished, the parties then provide an application to the OSBC. The OSBC looks at it for soundness. Is this going to be effective? Is this the right thing to do? Is it going to be profitable for the groups? Is there going to be problems? And then they have a duty and an obligation to see that it is approved if they think it's a good idea or disproved, right? So we have all these mechanisms that are protecting people. It's really sophisticated, but the ultimate goal is to have two consenting trust companies or two consenting banks enter into an agreement and transfer it on, right? And so it's a three-step process. First, the parties enter into the contract. Second, they enter an application into the state. And third, they send notices out to every single person. Everyone has a chance to say, hey, I don't want to go, I want to stay here. And then they get pulled out or they go to court and then it gets resolved that way. And then the transfer ends up going. And that is it happens all the time with banks when they get sold, right? So this is a mechanism because a lot of banks don't want to sell the entire charter. They want to just sell their trust department. They just want to sell a part of the accounts, right? So this is a really nuanced aspect that is going to happen. I'm confident it'll happen moderately often because previously it was the one by one. So it's you have to remove and appoint. You have to go to the probate court. You have to do a non-judicial settlement agreement. So this is a better legal mechanism.
Thanks for that explanation of the weeds, if you will, and how that works. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Fagg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I don't know if this question's for you or it might be for the other proponent. How many applications are denied in the last 5 years? We make application. Is there any of them ever denied?
That is a broad question.
Thanks for the question, Senator Fagg. We actually have not denied any applications under the banking code, so there had not been any.
All right. Follow-up question to that, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman. So it talks about if it's not implemented within 18 months, what was the thought process to this number? You know, why not 12? Why not 24? Just wondered what the thought process was there.
Another good question. We needed to come up with some sort of time frame that we felt was fair for the bank or trust company to engage in the activity, but also, you know, when we look at the safety and soundness of institutions, what happened 18 months ago may be completely different. Exactly why we chose 18, I believe that we chose that just because typically once every 18 months a bank or trust company is examined. So it is a bit arbitrary.
Senator Pittman.
This is for Mr. Bergman. Appreciate you being here. I, like Senator Gossage, on the other bill, get a little lost on trust. So appreciate your expertise here. Is there any, so you know, when we have certain loans and certain companies are servicing loans, sometimes that gets bought by another company and it gets reserviced. It's a little disconcerting to some of my constituents out there. They're like, we don't know who owns the loan anymore. We contracted with this bank and now it's off being serviced by these others. Is there really a problem for them? Not really. I understand that. It's just disconcerting because it's not their local person, right? Is this a similar thing where you see in the future a lot of these trusts basically getting moved around and consolidated into bigger and bigger organizations? Does that cause any kind of strain on the beneficiaries of these trusts at all?
Yeah, so it's, that is a wonderful question, and that's exactly what I want all of our employees to be worried about, right? What happens when someone is a new trustee on a trust, right? This is someone's family wealth. This is the highest obligation under the law. If we're not doing a good job of communicating that, then we shouldn't be doing what we're doing, right? And so the difference from the loan acquisitions is, so I think since the 80s when they kind of opened up the borders, like banks have there's way fewer charters than there used to be. Well, in trust companies, there's a lot fewer. There's 13 headquartered here. There's 33 banks with trust powers, right? So there's less than 50 entities. And there have been, I do envision there being a lot of consolidation, but that's also because there's certain barriers to entry. But that still doesn't mean that there's not going to be the neighborhood trust department, right? A lot of times when this happens is because the originating trustee can't service this anymore, right? So it's not like a loan where there's 1,000 banks around here, right? So for like a life insurance trust, which is sorry to bring that one up, but it's a trust vehicle that owns life insurance. There's only 6 companies in the U.S. that will administer those, right? And so there's already, because of the level of sophistication needed. And so, but from a public policy perspective, a trust company needs to talk to their beneficiaries. There has to be communication. There's statements that are generated. There's opening letters that are sent. There are requirements under the Uniform Trust Code, which we adopted in 1994, that say this is what has to happen in order for you to do it. So I'm always concerned about the well-being of the beneficiaries. So that is something that's at the top of our mind.
Any additional questions? I see none. Thank you very much. Committee, let me call your attention to additional proponent written-only testimony from Joe Carnes, who is with the Trust Division with the Kansas Bankers Association. I have no other proponent, opponent, or neutral testimony that has been submitted at this time. So that completes our work today. We will have another full day tomorrow, and then we'll see what next week brings. So appreciate your attendance and your attentiveness, and we will see you tomorrow.